Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and it's terrific to be here in Singapore. And I must say that I've been really impressed with the meeting so far. I thought yesterday was really interesting. And I feel as if with this presentation I'm almost preaching to the converted, because with Global BioImaging you've done a fantastic job of bringing the community together. And even at this stage where you're operating on a goodwill basis and people putting in-kind contributions in, I think it's exemplary to have a community so productive like this. So a few words on me, although this will be very short for those of you who don't know who I am. I'm Susan Daenke. I'm currently the coordinator, or the leader, I suppose, of the Instruct Hub, which is located in Oxford, UK. And Instruct is a research infrastructure for structural biology, and we are an ERIC. We've been an ERIC for 2 years, but we've been operational for 8 years. And we were one alongside European BioImaging of the early research infrastructures on the S3 roadmap, and we've been rubbing along in parallel all those years, and it's great to know that you'll be joining us as an ERIC pretty soon. But I'm not here to talk about Instruct-ERIC, I'm here to talk about RI-VIS. And RI-VIS is a Horizon 2020 project that was funded last year, started at the beginning of this year, with the intention to improve visibility of research infrastructures across all of the domains within the S3 roadmap. There we go. Okay, so the official title of my talk in the programme was Expanding RI Visibility to Strengthen Strategic Partnerships, but with apologies to Shakespeare for having a second title. My second title is Build It and They Will Come, which is something that we hear a lot about with respect to developing research infrastructures, and yes, they will, but also some of them need a little bit of help to get on the board, so to speak. And that's what RI-VIS is about. It's about helping to provide information to the right people in the right way, so that they understand what research infrastructures can do for them and the impact it can have on research. So research infrastructures have a bit of a credibility problem. Firstly, they are very diverse organisations. They can be large single-site facilities in a single country. They can be diversified across large areas globally, internationally, European, regionally. So they can have lots of different kinds of entities. And so they have an identity problem, because quite often people don't associate them with a single sort of activity or even domain. They have, as we discussed yesterday, a problem with people recognising them as professional services, and there's a lot to be done with respect to sustainability of staffing and practices to gain trust within the community for professionalism. A lot of them don't have sustainable funding. We are all on sort of funding cycles. With respect to the S3 research infrastructures, there is no core European funding for them, so it's up to us to establish membership that will keep us running, and that has its risks attached to it. There are issues related to staff careers and so on, and skills, training and retention. We've just heard a little bit about quality management and development of common standards. That's again something that people are concerned about, especially with respect to industry users. There isn't a clearly understood impact assessment of research infrastructures, and there's a lot of work, as has been mentioned, going on at the moment with OECD, but also within the S3 group, to establish KPIs for monitoring research infrastructures, and that's coming to fruition quite soon, and will all be monitored quite soon. Having research infrastructures as a publicly accessible service model is unfamiliar to the academic society or community in general. Certainly in our sort of sector, historically the model has been for large institutions, universities, to establish their own infrastructure and own it for their own use, and it's not open to public access. And so having a research infrastructure that is open publicly is something that is quite unusual, and academics are not used to using this model, and they're rather wary of it. We're all academics, I think, in this room, and we all know that our community is pretty resistant to change. So it's quite hard to get over that hurdle, to get people to use a model that they're unfamiliar with. There's a quote on the bottom that I stole actually from the latest OECD Global Science Forum, which is something that if you open your infrastructure up to people that you don't know, then inevitably you have to provide access to people you don't like as well as people that you do like. And that might also be a barrier to some. So why do we need RI-VIS? Well, we know that research infrastructures provide great value to society because it's a way of advancing knowledge, improving training for individuals associated with research, facilitating research projects, developing technologies and exploitation of these, and lots more. But despite the fact that we are all convinced of the value of research infrastructures, there is a huge deficit of correct information in the community at large about what research infrastructures do and how they do it. And this is a barrier because there are lots of opportunities within the community at large for expanding the facilities that research infrastructures provide to new international communities, to industry in many cases, and into areas that are perhaps outside of the initial domain that the research infrastructure specialises into. And so communication is the key thing here, and correct information is part of that. So RI-VIS is there to improve the situation of how to get the correct information out there, and we aim to provide guidance on how to do that and some tools to help people to do it. So this is the RI-VIS Consortium. Now, those of you who are familiar with life sciences research infrastructures, the S3 roadmap, most of them are represented here. So the consortium is very much weighted towards the life sciences, and there's a reason for that. When we answered the call for this project, we, as the life science research infrastructure, were very aware that our sector lagged pretty far behind some of the physical sciences research infrastructures that have been going for much longer than we have. So they tend to be large single-site facilities that have had decades in some cases to establish a reputation and build up a kudos. But the life sciences, most of these were formed within the last 10 to 15 years maximum. They tend to be distributed research infrastructures, which again is a more complicated model for people to understand. And so there was no real model for them to follow in establishing a method of operation that people could understand and a way to communicate that. So we put together a consortium that was mainly concerned with promoting the life sciences, but we have a balance in our consortium with some research infrastructures from other sectors as well. We have an advisory board that has the physics community and humanities and social sciences on board as well. So the need for increased visibility means that we can reach into broader scientific, industrial, general public communities, and also reach the funders, obviously, which is useful. In our sector, historically, the European research infrastructures have served the European user communities. But increasingly now, the EU itself is trying to promote globalisation of research infrastructures, which is a good thing. It means that we are globally competitive, but it also means that we open our access to much broader user communities. So we are targeting new international regions. Many of those have specific requirements for communication. They have preferences for methods of communication, but it's how you get that message across and who you go through to communicate that is important. We also need to target research infrastructure management and communication teams so that they understand the sort of guidelines and tools that we put in place and can use them efficiently. It's important to reach the policy and decision makers, and I would include in that the monitoring bodies when they are set up to monitor research infrastructures as well. The new scientific communities outside of the domain that you work within, so in our case we work with structural biologists, but there are lots of life sciences applications and research projects that could gain from access to some of the services that we provide in structural biology and vice versa. You know, what we're aiming to do and what EC are trying to promote is that there is going to be a single access position whereby a researcher can access any of the research infrastructure services in any of the domains that they choose to look for. Industry we talked about, and the broader public as well. It makes sense, obviously, to get the broad public on board. I don't have to tell you the impact that turtles eating plastic bags had on the plastic handling situation. So I'm not saying that we can be quite as impactful as that, but it is important with respect to gaining funding and getting policymakers on board for you to have public support for what you do as well. So RI-VIS is looking at best methods to provide accurate information to the communities. It will establish some pilot strategic partnerships as proof of principle that communication is working in new communities and with global outreach. We want to follow that up with establishing relationships with the third countries that we are reaching into within this project and formalise them so that they will endure beyond the lifetime of this project. And we'll provide and develop some tools for efficient communication that will be available to everybody. So with the consortium, we didn't start from scratch with respect to global outreach. This is just a spot map of contacts that our consortium already has globally. I'm not quite sure what the resource is in Alice Springs, but let's just leave that. So we've been building on this map, trying to increase our outreach. So the way we're doing this is to have host international outreach and partnering events, have presentations at scientific conferences and meetings, provide a navigable route through to existing RI services. This will be through our website, but it will be using, as I'll come to in a minute, a management system that is already in use by quite a few of the research infrastructures that will tie everything together. We'll be hosting workshops to develop common standards for communications. We plan one major conference showcasing the contribution of research infrastructures to society, and we'll be doing that by showcasing scientific and societal impact case studies. And we have a staff mobility exchange program, which in our particular case, in our research infrastructure, we found to be extremely useful, and I hear that you also have found the same. So the flagship events for RI-VIS are three major workshop conferences in new international areas for us. The first will be in Cape Town. These locations were established by having a survey of all of the research infrastructures that we are working for to see where they felt the most impact could be gathered in a new community where they hadn't actually made much impact before. So South Africa is the first on our list, and there will be a meeting in March next year. In 2020, will be Latin America, will probably be Brazil, Campinas, and then in 2021 it will be Australia, and that will include the Asian region as well. Typically these events, 70 to 100 people, and they're open to not just RI-VIS partners, but also to any other research infrastructure who would like to have a presence there. And I would certainly invite EoEIV and Global BioImaging to be there at these meetings if they would like to do that. I think it would be very appropriate and very welcome. So the events there will include presentations to promote the research infrastructure services, so that they have the opportunity of talking face-to-face with people who might be their users or their funders or their supporters or their local contacts. We'll have panel discussions to discuss new opportunities, but also barriers that may be local or regional to establishing new relationships. We will establish regional pilot collaborations so that people in new communities will have an opportunity to test the services, to try them out, to understand the process and the method, and see whether it's going to suit them. And if they need some modification of the model for their local instance, then that's something that could be discussed, so that you're not just closing off opportunities to people because of local reasons that you don't understand. So, as it says there, if you're interested in attending any of these workshops, stay in touch, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. So I mentioned that we obviously have an RI-VIS website. All EU projects have a website. But the key thing with this is that it will be a way of drilling down from one entry point into all of the research infrastructure, individual websites and services. So we're using what we call the ARIA software, which is a piece of access management software that was developed to manage events and access provision on a web interface. And this system is used by a number of research infrastructures, including Global BioImaging and Instruct and a few others as well. So it makes situations where you would like to mix and match services between research infrastructures a little bit easier, because there's a common platform and it's easier to share data through this system. It'll also be a way of providing tools that we develop for communications as well. So we've done a little bit of work already. We've built on the experience of some of the previous EU projects that have already analysed the research infrastructure landscape, and we will now use some of that information to map the research infrastructure services onto the new target communities to see where the demand will be and how we can meet that demand. We'll provide guidelines and advice for targeting and enabling new partnerships, and eventually there'll be a proof of principle in the outreach program by establishing those new relationships and formalising them, hopefully with MOUs or local agreements. So the key aim for doing all of this is to help with long-term sustainability for research infrastructures. As I said, sometimes it's a little bit precarious, and we all need to try and find a long-term plan that is sustainable. The development of a common communication framework will be useful. It will be some standardised approaches and tools that everybody can use We'll be very careful to make it universally applicable to everybody. Obviously, there are specialist requirements for each research infrastructure, but there will be a core set of tools that everybody can use. We've currently got a survey on communications tools, and if you feel like participating, the link is there. Just have a go and give us your feedback. It would be quite useful. Thank you. We are interested in socioeconomic value of research infrastructures for international support, and we will try and present some of this information to our new communities so that they understand the impact that research infrastructures can have in their region. And it's important, I think, when we go into new communities to tailor these impacts for the regions themselves. They're quite different, actually, in different parts of the world. And this is something that we'll have to work carefully on. And finally, we'll be exchanging good practices between the European research infrastructures and the third countries that are the target regions. We will have a staff exchange call open next year as well. And everybody will be invited to apply for that. So this is what we've done today on the Common Communication Framework. We had a first workshop in Faro where we analysed the obstacles and opportunities for communication across all of the research infrastructures. And it was quite surprising just how diverse the communication strategies were. But we managed to, a lot of that was semantics actually, we managed to consolidate those into a reasonable common set of principles. So we now have a communication framework, or at least the bones of the structure of a communication framework. There's a second workshop in Paris to begin building the tools to support that framework. And in doing this, we're working with another Horizon 2020 project, which is ERIC Forum, which is doing much the same thing, and we're working together so that we align our communication strategies so that it's not too discrepant between the two. So in summary, this is what RI-VIS is doing. It's providing guidelines, efficient communication, a toolkit, staff exchanges so that there can be some direct exchange of information and practical experience of using the research infrastructure and services. We're establishing new global relationships, and increasing visibility of research infrastructures and providing information on their impact. We hope that it will be a useful thing for everybody to use. I think most of the research infrastructures have got the bones of all of these things that they've established themselves, but in rather different ways. And for those new research infrastructures, they're a little bit further towards the bottom end of the development scale than we are. It will be very useful to have some help to get things going. I know that when we started, we knew nothing at all, and there was no help available at all. And it seems silly for everybody to reinvent the wheel time and again. So we hope this will be useful for everybody. This is just the RI-VIS. There's me coordinating, project manager. Natalie is very conscientious, so if you have any questions about RI-VIS or how you might get involved or how it could work for you or whatever, you can contact Natalie. We have a number of research infrastructures involved in leading work packages. We have a Twitter account and a website, the usual things. There we are. And thank you again for the invitation, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Susan, for this very comprehensive overview about the RI-VIS project. Questions for Susan? Antje.
first a big thank you that you followed the invitation, and also thank you that you invited Global BioImaging community to participate in the conferences. So maybe this is more a remark than to the community. I would like to link up a little bit then the communication between Global BioImaging and RI-VIS to inform our partners when there are relevant events coming up in Latin America or in Australia, so that you know when this is happening. And I would like to ask you to spread also the news to the other infrastructures in your regions that are not only imaging, but for example structural biology or marine biology, to inform your colleagues about this opportunity. And yes, so thank you very much for linking us up, and I hope that you will see some of our community also participating.
That would be really good. You know, I think it would be a good opportunity for us to work together. You know, even if you're not fully a partner, you're very welcome to join.
Any other comments or questions?
So, yeah, I'm sitting here hearing a lot of overlap between the different Horizon 2020 projects and thinking that if I'm an advisor for the agency, I'm trying to trim some of that overlap. I know you see it as a strength, but at some point it looks redundant. So I think it's important to be clear how the communications piece complements and does not replicate what the other programs are doing.
I think that's a very good observation. I think we do struggle with that on the European side, that the European framework programs sometimes fund coordination and support actions that should ideally build on each other, but sometimes you have to go through several generations of these to really get it done right. And I think Susan was very polite in saying that they are building on the efforts of previous CSAs in this domain that in principle were already tasked to do some of this work, and that were not as successful, I think, as one had hoped. They also maybe came at a time that was a bit too early in the development of the landscape of the research infrastructures, because given that Europe has so many independent nation states, the development of pan-European infrastructure simply is a time-consuming exercise. And so some of the tools that were being built for enabling communication and outreach were being built before you knew what you were communicating about. And so I think this project now, I think, is actually happening at the right moment. And I think it will hopefully really get things right that are useful for our community. But I think the observation is correct.
I think that's right, but also the EU has realised over the last several years that it's better that we all work together. So these projects do now work in alignment with each other, so that we don't duplicate and there isn't too much redundancy.
So the messaging is going to be important, that we have language that is complementary and doesn't sound to the outside world as if it's duplicated.
It's a good observation. I think in the interest of time and making it to lunch, I think we should probably move on. Thanks again very much, Susan.